Welcome back, everybody. I'm honored to speak to an actor who I have been binging over the past few weeks on Kim's Convenience. We're speaking with an actor, director, writer, and a martial artist, which I'm really anxious to get into. Sugith Varughese. Excuse me, Sugith. We were talking about pronouncing your name correctly, and then at the take, I bombed it. So
no worries.
Varughese.
Varughese. It's like Portuguese. Varughese, Portuguese. That's what I.
Perfect. It makes perfect sense. And before that, I tried it out at least a few times, and it was perfect. But usually, when they say action, then boom, you ruin that take. But
that's why we have take two.
Yes, but we're gonna go with it because I think that's reality, and I want to deal with reality as much as possible. So
well, you know, it's not your fault. I have the world's worst show business name, but it's mine.
I don't think so. I don't think so. And you know, both you and I are immigrants. So I came into the United States with the name of Konstantin Manoilenko. When you know, my ESL teacher looked at it, she said no, and then she said, okay, here's the American version of it, and we're gonna go with that. So yeah, I know what that's like. At some point, as a matter of fact, and this is out of this you know, kind of discussion, but a fun story is I was such a fan of Arnold growing up that when you know, after 6 years we were getting our citizenship, they said you can switch your last name to whatever you want, and I seriously considered switching my last name to Schwarzenegger. I wanted to be, you know, Konstantin Schwarzenegger. Fortunately, I didn't do that. Otherwise, that would have been much more difficult to deal with now. Okay, so I also wanted to apologize on one thing, aside from mispronouncing your last name, is when we started talking, I initially said that I saw you on Kim's Convenience, and that's how I know you. That actually is inaccurate because I saw you for the first time on my third favorite drama of all time, Suits. I saw you in 2016. You had a couple of episodes where you were on the show.
I was a judge. I was you know, Suits is an interesting show because the judges were like a little rep company of judges, and whenever they needed a judge, they'd give one of us a call. So I was on, I think I was in season 6 and season 8.
Yeah, you did 2 episodes, absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting, and we'll come back to Suits in a second. But well, actually, I wanted to ask because you know I you know, binge Suits. Suits I loved, or actually no, I didn't binge it because I started watching from season 2, and once caught up, I had to be waiting. When my family was finally introduced to it, and then they were binging it, and it took a little while for my wife to understand why I love some of the characters. But on a Suits, and I know it was shot in Toronto, so I know a lot of Canadian actors were on it. When you were told, hey, you're going to be on Suits, and you're going to be wearing robes, was there a little bit like, oh, come on, I didn't get a suit out of this?
Well, actually, they fitted me for Suits, for actual suits. There's 2 suits that they fit me, and they're gorgeous suits. And I actually was on a show on Stars in the U.S. Called The Girlfriend Experience, where I did have a lot of suits. And the guy who fitted me is a genius tailor in Toronto. He does you know, he's like the suit maker to the stars for television here. And so, you know, we met again when he was doing the suits. And so I did have some wonderful suits, and under the robes, I'm wearing some great clothes. And in fact, when the show ended, they were selling off all the wardrobe, and they were selling Judge Howard's, I think that was my character's name, suit.
I think so, yeah.
Though I don't know how you would buy it because it would only fit me, you know, it was altered for me, but I guess somebody out there has my suit.
Well, okay. If they know, we'll make sure that we'll link to it. Maybe somebody will respond and saying, "Here it is." Okay. So the other aspect that I found interesting is that when I started binging Kim's Convenience, and Frank came in, I immediately recognized his voice. I couldn't understand why, because I didn't recognize his face right away, but I immediately recognized the voice. And then I had to stop. I had to go back and kind of figure out that, yes, he was Donna's dad. That's how I know him.
Frank is played by Derek McGrath.
Yes, wonderful.
And he goes back. He was on Seinfeld.
My goodness. I
He was
don't
that. He
remember,
was
and
that.
now we need
Yeah,
to.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, he was on Seinfeld. But I worked with. I mean, Derek's a wonderful guy. I worked with him. There's another TV sitcom that came out of Canada a few years ago called Little Mosque on the Prairie, which was about Muslims in a little small town in Saskatchewan, and Derek was one of the series leads in that show for 3 seasons. So that's when I first worked with Derek, and now I haven't had a scene with him on Kim's Convenience yet, but we pass each other in the dressing rooms.
Well, please give him my regards. I think he's wonderful,
Yeah,
and
he's a fantastic actor.
obviously has a very distinctive voice, which I immediately recognize. The thing that startled me the most is you and I, started talking yesterday, and I know you from, I thought just Kim's Convenience, and then as I started doing research and kind of getting ready for the interview, I saw that you're an award-winning writer. You are a actor, prolific actor with 100+ credits to his name. You're a director. You've been in all of these things, and I didn't know about you. And that part was a little frustrating, but is that, yeah, I heard you say in an interview once that, acting in Canada is a little bit like being in a witness protection program, which made me chuckle. And it took me back for a second because I thought,
well, I'm only partly kidding. Canada is a small country. We service American television. We shoot a lot of American television up here, but we do also our own shows. But Canadians are not very. I mean, their stars are the big U.S. stars just as much as in the U.S. So, in Canada, I mean, I can walk around on the street and get on the streetcar and the subway, and nobody notices. It's a much more quote unquote normal lifestyle, I suppose.
it's true. It's true. But thankfully, with now with the streaming services and with NBC picking up another show that you're in, Transplant, finally we're starting to get to see some of the wonderful work that's being done. I discovered Schitt's Creek the same way. I wouldn't have heard about it unless it was for streaming services, and thank God, because I love that show.
Well, so much of, I would say in the last 2-3 years, things have changed tremendously in terms of public profile because of streaming. I have, because Kim's Convenience gets shown on streaming services around the world now on Netflix.
Yeah.
My cousins in India get to see me. They never used to see me. They heard that I worked in television in Canada, but they've never seen anything I've done for 30 years. Now they're watching Kim's Convenience shortly after it's on in Canada. And, I get fan tweets from Malaysia and Australia. And, this is a whole new thing for somebody working out of Canada.
It's interesting, again, because we're so close. I'm in the US, so I think I know Canada, and obviously I didn't know very much. I know lots of Canadian actors who obviously I know because they've been in all of the American productions. I know things are shot in Canada. I tried to submit myself for some of those things, and I quickly realized that I couldn't because I don't live in Ottawa. I don't live in Toronto. I am not Canadian, and I think you have some quotas of certain number of Canadian actors have to be present in every production. Is that true?
Well, no, it doesn't work quite like that. It depends on the production. For instance, I'm in the upcoming season of a show called The Expanse, which is a big science fiction show on
Amazon.
Yeah. And they can hire anybody they want because they're basically shooting in Canada because they want to shoot in Canada, but they're not using any Canadian tax incentives or that kind of thing. If you use the tax credits and the Canadian tax incentives and that kind of stuff, then you do have to have a certain amount of money that is spent on Canadian production and Canadian talent and Canadian. But if you just come here and have your production, you can hire anybody you want. And then, of course, Canadian content has to be strictly Canadian, but they're also getting incentives and things from in order to qualify for Canadian content. They get tax credits as a result. So yeah, it all depends on where the money comes from.
Good, but I think at least there's a way or a mechanism to get more Canadian actors into all of these productions, which is great.
Well, I mean, Canadians would argue that the best way for a Canadian to get cast in Canada is to move to LA, because that's often, that's often what happens. Is that, well, I mean, most of my colleagues have moved to Los Angeles and then get better parts in the Canadian in shooting in Canada. But for American shows and even Canadian shows, I mean, that's just the reality of the business. Is that the perception is, if you're any good, you'd be in LA. And so Canadian resident performers have all, I mean, you asked why, it's a witness protection program. Well, that's why. The perception, and I'm just being very honest with you, the perception of, by both American or US primetime and Canadian casting, is that, the real talent is in LA. And if they can't afford to bring somebody from LA, then they'll look at the Canadian talent. I mean, I think there are lots of exceptions to that rule in terms of, casting directors in both countries who don't believe that.
Yeah.
But as a kind of stereotype, that we've been fighting that. And I'm a member of the union here too, the acting union. In the US, it's called SAG, Screen Actors Guild, AFTRA. In Canada, it's called ACTRA. And it's one of our issues, which is, why do people have to move to LA to get cast in Canada? But there is a reality to that perception that we've been facing most of my professional life anyway.
It's strange. It echoes a little bit of what we have in Chicago. I'm in Chicago, so we have a lot of shows that are done in Chicago. A lot of Dick Wolf shows.
Right, and it's the same thing. You probably have to move to LA to get cast in a show in Chicago.
Yeah, LA or New York. Otherwise, the types of roles that we're able to get here are,
it'll be the one line part that is not worth flying somebody in for.
Yeah.
And and that it doesn't really matter, and that kind of thing. So I think that the struggles that Chicago actors face in that regard are equivalent to what we face. It may be a different level because you're just dealing with Chicago shot shows. We're dealing with everything that's shot in Canada, but I think the issue is the same.
Well, I'm hoping with the streaming services and more things being shown right now, that'll change, because I think that's ridiculous.
Well, I mean, Chicago's got one of the great acting communities in North America.
Yeah.
A lot of whom work only on stage, and outside Chicago, nobody's heard of them.
Yep.
And these are people who could, go on to Broadway or wherever without any, I went to drama school in the States. I did my undergraduate degree in theater at the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis. And one of the guys I went to school with, it was, I'm old, and he was a graduate student. I was an undergraduate, but we were taking the same directing class together. And he said, yeah, these friends of mine and I started a theater company in Chicago last summer, and then I decided to take a year off to do my graduate degree. I said, oh yeah, what's the name of the company? It's called Steppenwolf.
Yeah.
I mean, that's and all of those people, we don't know about them. I mean, unless they become John Malkovich. So I think that's the reality of an arts career outside LA and New York. You're going to be perceived as, like I said, witness protection program.
Yeah, the idea here in Chicago, from what I've gathered, and I am not at the point where I even have a co-star credit. I've done a lot of indies and shorts, but the idea is you kind of have to be in all of the shows here at certain level, co-star, maybe guest star, and then once you've kind of saturated that market, if you will, then you go to LA or New York. So that's
right. And when I was studying in Minneapolis, Minneapolis is a great theater center as well. Some of like one of the top actors at the Guthrie, I remember when I was there, who was playing leading roles at the Guthrie Theater his whole career, had to decide whether to move to LA or New York and start all over again, because he had no profile outside Minneapolis and he wasn't getting considered for anything but I mean, it was fine to be at the Guthrie, but you know what I mean, to expand your artistic horizons, he wanted to be considered for shows on Broadway or movies, and he wasn't going to be getting that, staying as the star of the Guthrie Theater, which is one of the great theaters of the country.
Yeah, it's strange, but hopefully more and more things are changing and people are getting more visible with ability to create your own content or just put anything on YouTube. The show, they're right there. But hopefully that allows people a chance to be seen and appreciated for what they're doing. I wanted to dive into some other aspects of your life. You're an immigrant. You were born in India and you came with your parents to Canada. How old were you when you came here?
Well, I'm really the son of immigrants.
Okay.
My family came to Canada when I was a year old, so I didn't have to learn a new culture. Growing up in Canada, being Canadian was my culture. But the issues about being the son of an immigrant family, and my name, my skin color, my sense of belonging, all of that stuff, I wear that on my sleeve for sure.
When you got here, obviously you were a child, but as you started growing up, were there a lot of people who are of similar ethnic background to you in the same areas?
No. When my family came, and particularly where we settled in the prairies in a city called Saskatoon, which is probably halfway around the world to the degree of longitude from where I was born in India. I was the only brown kid in my school. I was the only brown kid in my high school. As far as I can remember, maybe there was one other. I didn't have fellow members of my cultural background to hang with, and I didn't have role models of my cultural background to say, oh, I want to be like them when I grow up. So there's a real schizophrenia growing up, because you're kind of brown on the outside, and what are you on the inside?
Mm-hmm.
And how are you learning how to belong when whatever you do, you're never going to be white? You know what I mean? And it was a real challenge and struggle for me growing up to get over that desire, wanting to be like everybody else, and knowing that I never could be, and that being okay. And that was a real, I think that's what's fueled my artistic life, is that tension.
Is that, when did you make the decision that you wanted to go into entertainment? I know your family is doctors.
Indian family, we're all doctors. My dad was a doctor. My grandfather was a doctor. I have an uncle who was a doctor, 2 cousins who were doctors. I actually was the first pre-med drama double major at my first university, which was in Saskatchewan.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't made a decision to try and pursue the arts professionally. I kind of followed my nose via education, in that I was interested in, I was always doing stuff when I was in school, and creative drama and the high school musical and, all that kind of stuff. And so when I went into university, I assumed I would apply for medical school someday. So I did tick off pre-med as my undergraduate major, but I also knew I wanted to study theater and Shakespeare and the American novel or whatever. And so I hedged my bet in terms of my education. And it was only after a couple of years of university that I realized I'd really like to do this. But again, I had no role models at the time that said, okay, you could have a career in the arts being a brown guy in North America or being a brown guy in Canada. When I transferred from my original university to the University of Minnesota, I was still the only brown guy. I remember I was in a production of No Place to Be Somebody, which is a famous Black American play. Mm-hmm. And the director had run out of Black actors to be in it. And so, he had to cast me. And I remember I played a character called Machine Dog, who is the blackest, most militant. He was a ghost figure of, he was like a Black Panther on steroids, and I mean, I was way over my head trying to play that part. You know what I mean? Like that kind of. I mean, it was a good challenge in terms of my artistic growth, but I don't know if it was quote unquote appropriate. But that was what That was what he was facing in Minnesota at the time.
Interesting.
So I just think that it's I don't know what to say. Like this is a tension in how I decided whether to do this professionally. I don't know if I've still decided whether I'm going to do this professionally. It's just something that evolved. I mean, I wasn't. I started as a writer, and the reason I started as a writer was I didn't think I could have a career as an actor because I didn't see any brown actors on stage. I didn't see them on movies and TV shows growing up. So how could I project myself into that? So I didn't plan on being an actor. I wanted to break into film and television. I didn't have an uncle who was a movie producer. I didn't have a movie camera. All I had was a typewriter. I mean, this is how long ago. And so I read a couple of screenplays that I could find. Back then, there was nothing online. Online didn't exist. I found a few paperback copies of screenplays in a bookstore in Minneapolis, and I read them, and then I wrote a little script based on my experience working in a meatpacking plant one summer. And I used that script to get into graduate film school in Toronto. And that script actually got read by one of my profs who turned out to be a producer at the CBC, which is our public broadcaster. And he was producing a TV series. And he said, why don't you look at the pilot and if, think of an idea for an episode, just as a joke. And I came in and I did. And then his producer on the show liked the idea and they hired me to write the episode. And that's how I broke in. And I planned only to be a writer. And then my second or third project was a TV movie for the CBC that was a comedy about an Indo-Canadian guy. And back then, there were no actors of Indo-Canadian background. They actually flew the producer and director to LA to try and find somebody. And they found somebody whose name was Howie Mandel. And I went, what? And they hired a makeup person to paint Howie Mandel brown. This is before Howie Mandel was even famous. Wow. And they auditioned him. And thankfully, they said, it's not a good idea. So at that point, the film was going to be canceled. The whole thing was going to be over. So I begged them before they canceled the movie, let me have a chance at auditioning. Having only acted in drama school and one play outside drama school. And they allowed me to audition. I got the part. And so that's how I started acting. And I've had sort of two parallel careers since then, acting and writing television mostly. Mm-hmm. Lately, in the last 10, 12 years, it's primarily acting. But, like I said, I hadn't planned on being an actor, and here I am.
It's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing how things work, even when you think it's just on a whim or on a joke, because you never know who's reading it. It's great. When I'm still trying to figure out how your immigrant doctor parents allowed you to be in the entertainment industry.
Well, I think because I had enough success early on, as a writer. I was still in graduate school when I wrote that first script for CBC.
Yeah.
I think they were going, oh, okay, this is great, not knowing that you don't get to do that every day. I was kind of a lucky break. But then, for the first few years, I was very lucky. I got a chance to write for the Muppets. I was one of the original writers of the series Fraggle Rock. And so, in the first 10 years of my professional life, I was fairly successful as a writer, and I think that got my family through the hump. And then, of course, it's an arts career is a rocky road, and I hit the bumps after Fraggle Rock ended. But over time, they saw that for what it's worth, I was able to manage. The funny thing was that when I turned 30, my father turned to my mother, and because he always wanted me to be a heart surgeon. He was a brain surgeon.
Okay.
Heart surgeons are the rock stars of medicine, right? And he apparently turned to my mother and said, "Oh, he'd be just finishing his residency now," you know. And then the last time I was in India, I stayed with my dad's first cousin, so they're the same age.
Yeah.
And he says to me, "You know, when your father was a boy, he wanted to be a film star." And I went, aha, aha.
Okay.
So maybe my dad got to live a little vicariously through me, and that made up for all the insecurities.
Yeah, when I told my parents, and I spent the first 14 years in Ukraine, and the first 14 years I was sure that I was going to be an actor because that's all I wanted to do, and that was going to be my path. I already started talking to people about who were older than me, who were going to go and get education in it, and then we moved to the United States. And I told my parents, I'm still planning to be an actor. They said, look, you have the nose of Dustin Hoffman, but he's a better actor. Get a career. And I
harsh.
yeah,
Really?
yeah. Well, that's, again, Indian parents, Jewish parents, they get straight to the point. They tell you what they think. And I struggled, and I took a huge detour because I went into IT and HR while still trying to act and take classes in the middle, and everything kind of got up until I finally decided a number of years ago that whatever it is I'm doing for money, and I still do IT and HR. My heart is acting, and I'm going to continue doing it. And if something happens with it, then at some point maybe it'll become a career. If not, I'm still going to continue doing it as much as I can because I can't not do it. So
well, I mean, I've always said that if I didn't get paid to do what I do, I would pay to do it.
Yeah,
I mean, that's how sick it is. Being an artist. It's not for the faint of heart, and it's about not having a choice. I talk about being an actor or being a writer or whatever. It's a calling. It's like choosing to become a priest or a monk or something. It's regardless of what it would pay. I mean, I think there are people who aspire to it or even try to do it because they want to be a star and they see it as some kind of, that part of it. And maybe they'll be lucky and that's what happens to them. I mean, 99.99% don't become stars. And the 1%, and I consider myself the 1% who have careers, it's not about being a star. It's about being an artist, right? And that's your job. And hopefully you'll make a living at it. But even if you don't make a living at it, you can't help doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife once asked me when I was, I live in the suburbs of Chicago, and I did a short film which I loved. I did it for free, and we were shooting overnight. So I had to, get in my car after my family went to sleep. I had to drive to downtown Chicago, do the overnight shoot, go back home, try to get some sleep, work, and then do it again the next day. And my wife looked at me like I'm insane, saying, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "Because I have to. It's who I am, and I love every moment of it, no matter how ridiculous it sounded. It's just you either are or you're not. That's as much as I can explain it."
I mean, that said, what I urge people, young people especially, is learn to manage your artistic career as a career. Don't be like hoping for the best. It is a business, and you have to understand financial literacy, and you have to pay attention to all of that stuff. Otherwise, it's going to be you're going to have a tough time. You're going to have a tough time. You just know that you're going to have a tough time, but learn how to manage that tough time fiscally responsibly. That's as much about being an artist and surviving in the arts as having talent.
And the other kind of realization that I had, I don't know if you feel the same way, but I learned initially I kind of I had my thriving IT consulting business, and I got to a point where I was very comfortable, and then I had that kind of hopefully not a midlife, because that's way too early, crisis where I said, okay, I'm done. I'm taking the next number of years and I'm going to act and I'm going to write and I'm going to do a lot of these things. And I started doing that, and then it became because you're not going to get that level of success, it became a chore, and acting and money started pushing onto it. So the second go around that I'm doing right now, I have my consulting business, and I specifically created it in a way to allow myself to have enough time to audition and to do things that I want. And I still have my business. So now when I'm acting, it has no money on it at all. Whether I'm getting paid, not getting paid, I just took kind of the financial expectations out of it, and I'm doing it just for me. If it works, beautiful. If I get paid, great. But I'm not doing it because I need to earn something from acting.
Well, I mean, I would love to be in that position, but once, well, if you're in the union, there's no choice. You don't have an option. You got to pay me, and I'm grateful for that, because I'd rather make a living at it than not. But I understand, where everybody's going to be at a different level in their careers and in their process, and everybody has to manage the way they manage. Some people, even experienced professionals who've had series jobs, have to, have secondary jobs once in a while, and there's no shame in that. That's about being a professional too. In my case, I was lucky because I diversified as an artist. So if I wasn't writing, I was acting, and if I wasn't acting, I was writing, and both, for money in some way, or I got a directing job or whatever. And so because I had multiple streams of skill sets, I haven't had to have had a second job in my career, but some years are a lot worse than others, and you have to learn to bank your money.
Yeah. Is that, if we're talking about the secret of your success and longevity, would that be it? The diversification?
I would give diversification a lot of credit. Yeah, that enabled me to survive. As I said, I started as a writer, and I continued as a writer even when I started acting, and I still write, though the acting has kind of taken over in the last few years. But diversification is kind of how I was able to have a career in the arts.
Good, thank you. That's a very very important thing to mention for everybody, and make sure that people hear it, and not just be laser focused and then crush. Let's talk about your acting approach. The part that I really enjoyed, again, going back to Kim's Convenience, because that's fresh in my mind from binging every episode of the last 4 seasons. Every time your character, Mr. Mehta, was coming on, I really was looking forward to it, because I love the way he speaks, and I love the verbal kind of jousting that's going on between him and Appa, and I love your comedic timing. So to me, it was always probably the most fun character that I looked forward to seeing all the time. How is it playing him for you? Is it enjoyable because you're a writer, you're a director, so I'm sure your brain is looking at it.
Okay, well, there's two things I could say about playing Mr. Mehta on Kim's Convenience. Yeah. First, I swear to God, on my mother's, she's still alive, God bless her, soul, I'm not trying to be funny. Okay? Regardless of whether the part was comedic or whether the part is drama or whatever, I'm not trying to be funny, and I'm not trying to be dramatic. And in that case, I'm just trying to be truthful. Okay? I have to rely on the writing to do the heavy lifting in terms of what's funny and what's not funny. I mean, I will take credit for timing, and I will take credit for delivery, but without the text itself being funny, there's nothing I can do to make it funny. I mean, I can probably add some shtick to it, but I know that I'm standing on thin ice. In our case, in the case of Kim's Convenience, the writing is tremendous. The material is so good that I just have to show up almost. I mean, that's how I feel anyway. Now, there's a lot of things I think I bring to the craft of playing Mr. Mehta. For instance, you talk about his voice. Well, that vocal delivery is based on a couple of people I know. My spouse's boss speaks in that way. He's not Indian, but he has the way of, there's occasionally when Mr. Mehta sort of shouts a word out,
Yeah.
I mean, that I stole from him. He speaks with an accent because he's an immigrant, but I've played immigrant characters who speak with accents before. And if you listen to those characters, like the character I played on Little Mosque on the Prairie was also an Indian immigrant with an accent, but he came from a different class, a different background than Mr. Mehta does. So the accent wasn't the same. Mr. Mehta's accent, there's a famous Indian restaurateur in Canada who I know personally. His name's Vikram Bij, and I kind of copied a bit of his accent because it's a kind of erudite, high class kind of accent, educated and posh, and I wanted that to be his accent, not a working class, guy who's just trying to get along. Mr. Mehta comes with a different attitude, and I thought that so I bring that to it. The other thing that I've always felt is important, and this is pure craft stuff, knowing how a character walks. If I know how a character walks, if I can figure that out, and I know it's not a big thing, it's a very little thing, but somehow being comfortable in the movement of a character, being comfortable in the voice of a character, once I nail that for myself, the acting kind of takes care of itself. Like my approach has always been that acting, writing, directing, they're all the same job. The job is storytelling. And if you understand story, then you just apply the principles of storytelling to whichever job in the storytelling process you have. So as a writer, your storytelling, you have to understand what a story is. You have to know, the principles of story structure, how to execute in terms of scenes and dialogue. That's on paper. A director is a storyteller, behind the camera or with the camera, and he has to understand what matters and what doesn't matter so that he's aiming the camera in the right direction. The actor is in front of the camera telling the story, and if I don't understand the story, if I don't know what story means as an actor, there's no way I can act it, at least as far as I'm concerned. It's it's because I was a writer, it's because I was a director, that I think I bring a certain skill set to being an actor that's in the same arena, and that enables me to be not just a quote-unquote good actor, but useful, because the job that all of these departments have, acting, directing, writing, editing, cinematography, makeup, lighting, every one of those jobs is telling the story. And every one of those jobs requires the person doing them to understand the story. Because the makeup artist is telling the story through how they do the makeup. The wardrobe designer, like I often go into fittings, and they're really interesting for me because I have a creative conversation with the costume designer in terms of the story. And how are we telling the story through the wardrobe? And are we telling the story through the wardrobe? And I get really annoyed with designers who just sort of have gone to the store and dressed and got some clothes. And some do, and I really push them and say, look, I want what I'm wearing to be part of this. Like if I'm dressed, the better I'm dressed in terms of telling the story, the less acting I have to do.
Yeah.
The better the set is. I mean, you haven't seen Transplant, but this is a hospital show that I'm in. Kim's Convenience is the #1 comedy in Canada, and Transplant is the #1 drama on Canadian television. And I'm in both of them, so I'm very lucky.
Nice.
But Transplant is a big show set in a hospital, and our set, which is in Montreal, is on a soundstage, and this set is jaw-dropping. I mean, it is, as far as you can tell, a real hospital. I've been on a lot of sets in my career. You walk around the corner and you see it's a set. The wall is fake, and there's a sandbag holding it up and all that kind of stuff. On our set in Montreal on Transplant, you feel like you're in a real hospital. The walls don't move. The floor is real. The ceiling's there. And other than, you can eventually find a door and goes outside and you realize, oh, we're in a soundstage, you feel like you're in a hospital. So when you've got that level of reality as an actor to be in, you don't have to act as much, which is good, right? The less acting, quote unquote, you do, and the more being, the more reacting you are able to do as an actor, the better. And I think, getting back to Kim's Convenience, when you talked about, okay, you enjoy seeing Mr. Mehta show up, I think it's because of all of that. I think it's a combination of really good material, a really clear character that I've invented through the way I walk and the way I speak, and an ease as a result of not, quote unquote, acting, but just trying to be truthful. And I think that's why it works.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That actually is a lot of extremely useful information, because we're taught many different methods on how you can put yourself in the life of somebody else and how to be truthful in that. And it's very easy to get lost in it. And
I know what you're talking about, and it infuriates me, because I think acting training has taken on a life of its own that has very little to do with the reality of being a professional actor.
Yep.
Very few of the pros that I work with have much good to say about all of that kind of stuff that you're talking about in terms of actor training and all that. I mean, it may be an interesting exercise to do as a student, but it's not practical in a real professional situation. Nobody does that stuff.
So if you were to say, in addition to what you just were describing as your approach, what would be the practical aspects that you would recommend for a real working actor?
Well, first of all, understand the material.
Mm-hmm.
Understand the material from inside out. So that means it is better for an actor to read as many plays as they can, so that they learn what story is and what structure is and what it is what their job is in terms of that character within that story. So I remember when I was directing kids, I did a lot of kids television, and I would give them an exercise to do as homework, which they really enjoyed. And I said, look, for every one of your scenes, I want you to, on the left side of the page, which is blank, I want you to write the answers to 3 questions. What just happened? How do I feel? What do I want? And I want you to write 1-word answers for each of those questions, so that whenever we do that scene, you can look at that left side of your page and remind yourself, what just happened? Okay, my mother got mad at me. How do I feel? I feel sad. What do I want? I want comfort. Okay, so now you can walk into that scene, and with all the chaos of film production, where somebody's fitzing with your face and somebody's moving you around and you're giving you a mark, and you're 12 years old on your first kids TV show, and you got an idiot like me directing you, you don't have to get lost in that, because you know the answers. All you have to do is remember the answers to those questions. What just happened? Oh, my mother got mad at me. How do I feel? Sad. What do I want? Comfort. And no matter what you do, then the acting of it comes out of that, right? It comes out of a very clear, simple intention. I want comfort. And the text may be you coloring a book. Maybe that's the shot of the kid coloring in a coloring book, but the actor is going to be coloring that book with that intention in mind, and the camera will see that. And that's the truth, right? If you try to do more than that, you're going to then get outside yourself. You're going to get in your head, and it's going to be false. And the camera can see falseness really quickly. So I think it's about being truthful and getting under the skin of the material enough so that you can play a very clear, simple intention. Because we go through our lives, we're not complicated, double thinking everything that we do. We just show up and be.
Yeah.
And I think that's how you need to be going into a scene. And as I said, that's why I rely on things like the text, the costume, the lighting, the wardrobe. That's, you know, the set design. That's got to do a lot of the work, because I'm going to be doing as little acting as I can in order to be truthful. Because acting, and you know what I mean when I say acting, I mean being phony and false and outside yourself. I want to be genuine and true and real inside myself, and I do everything I can to strip away all the crap and allow that to happen. So that, especially in film and television, what happens is I end up doing something I couldn't repeat. I didn't know I was going to do it.
Yeah.
I was just in the moment.
Yep.
Right? Thankfully, we're filming it, so they got it. But then the director comes up to me and says, "Oh, do that again." I said, "What? I don't know what I did. I was just in the moment. You know, I hope you had the camera on."
Yeah.
I mean, I will do it again, but I can't guarantee repeating it, because I wasn't trying to do something the first time. I was being, right, in the moment with that text. You know, I was hitting my mark and all of those technical things, but all those kinds of things, and it's. I mean, I know what directors are saying when they want that, because they want the other angle and they liked it so much and all that. And I will I'll do the best I can. Yeah. But I'm also pointing out to them that I'm not faking it, right? So you can't sort of, you have to be playing your A game, because I'm playing my A game. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And again, we get, I'm going to say, people like myself, we get so much into the mechanical aspects, and we get into our head, and we get into, okay, well, what did I do on this take? Because now we have to do another 15 takes, and then we have to change the shot, and then we have to do this. So not only do I have to remember my lines, I have to remember, and you go through all of that, and it takes you out of it, and it takes real mental kind of energy draining process to get yourself back. So I love what you're saying, because it removes that, and it gets it down to a very simple thing. Before every take is,
it's simple. It's simple.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's easy.
You're right.
But that's why it's doable.
It's repeatable.
Because it's simple. So you can aspire to that. Whereas it's not complex, it's not complicated, it's not, and so, but I'm not going to say that it's easy. Don't confuse simple and easy. Right. It is simple. It's not necessarily easy.
Yeah, repeatable in a sense where before every take, you can just remember, okay, what are my 3 things? And then it's repeatable, right. So you can get into that habit. So, yeah.
And it means that you're not injecting crap into the scene.
Yeah.
To make it work. You're allowing the scene to unfold with you in it. And, and I'm not saying that I'm not doing things as an actor, as I said, with the vocal delivery and the timing and all that stuff. And a lot of that can't be taught.
Right.
It's you either have it or you don't. But what can be taught, I think, is what I talked about, which is getting under the skin of the material, understanding what just happened, how do I feel, what do I want, focusing on your intention, and then allowing the scene to happen to you.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that's very, very usable by actors out there. Few more things on acting, and I want to get into martial arts because I have to. So, in terms of acting and accents. You don't have an accent. You are a 1-year-old.
Well, I have a Canadian accent. I mean,
okay. You don't have an Indian accent. No. Which just saying that an Indian accent, there are hundreds of languages in India. There are how many dialects? When you choose an accent, I'm glad you went into kind of your process of choosing an accent based on who the person is and what it feels like. But and this probably goes into a much wider area of the types of roles that you're asked to play and when you were asked to play them. But when...
Well, like I said, I'm on these 2 shows. I have an accent in Kim's Convenience. I speak in my normal voice on Transplant.
Good. Good. Do you have, not that you have an issue with it, but is there a part that says, I don't want to be typecast as the Indian guy? Just like in my case.
Well, I think you were right with I don't want to be typecast.
Right.
The Indian guy is not on that. Doesn't bother me. It's the typecasting that. So I don't want to be typecast, whatever that means, and it means different things for different people.
Sure.
But you know, and it's not even typecast. I mean, I've played 25 doctors. Okay, so does that mean I'm typecast as a doctor? Maybe, but I'm happy to play 25 doctors and counting because, you know, the material is interesting and I don't mind being a doctor and it's an interesting role and, you know, whatever. Like it's not, so typecasting isn't even an issue per se. It's stereotyping.
Yeah.
So not typecasting, but stereotypecasting. I would draw the line at that. But, you know, I think your question is about, well, do you want to play Indians or not? I mean, the reality is in my career, in the era that I was working, I didn't have an option. I had to either choose to play an Indian character because if you weren't, you know, most of the time, if the character wasn't written as an Indian character, accent or not, they weren't calling me in to audition for it. The industry defaults to white if they don't specify an ethnicity. That's changing. But for the first 30 years of my professional career, the default was white, and you were not white if specified. And that was my reality. So I can choose to either go for the Indian character, because it's the only one I'm up for, or not work at all. So, I mean, I was going for those Indian characters. I mean, I would have a conversation whether if it was a stereotype, I wouldn't do it. But for the most part, I always said, okay, the character's Indian. Is he an immigrant? Yes. Does he have to be an immigrant? Yes. Therefore, he speaks with an accent? Yes. Okay, so then I apply the acting job of what kind of accent, what kind of, you know, all those things. And it's an acting exercise, and I have no problem with it. I'd rather they cast me than Howie Mandel.
Yes, I agree with that. The context from my perspective was because, you know, I'm a native Russian speaker, because I can do a Russian accent, because I can do these Eastern European accents. You know, should I use that as a springboard to get in and get more roles? But I don't want to be put in a place where I am viewed as that, oh, he's the Russian guy. I'm more. I want to be able to do all sorts of roles that don't require accents at all.
I just don't think you should be turning down a Volkswagen because you want a Cadillac.
Agreed. And I don't, yeah.
You know, like it's one part. So you have to ask yourself, do I want to do that part? But saying, okay, is this then going to prevent me from getting other parts? Unlikely.
Good.
You know, what it's going to do is probably get you a shot at other parts because you got something on film, right? Your job, especially starting out, is to work. Get stuff done so that you get a reel together that, you know, gets you to the next level.
Yeah.
And, you know, you will have if you look at you can go to my IMDb and watch my current demo reel.
I did.
It's a bunch of different characters. Some have accents, some don't. Some have different, you know, it's a range. I mean, we get to play characters as actors, and that's what you want to do. So I personally wouldn't get hung up on the specter of being typecast unless, you know, unless it's a problem. You're working all the time, making SAG scale as the Russian mobster, and then you can say, okay, well, I don't want to do it anymore. But I don't know. It's not a bad job.
All right, we'll revisit it. We'll see at what point that happens. I think I just, you know, having done indies and shorts and having done 3 Russian guys at some point, I said, okay, I've done that. It's essentially.
But, you know, in my case, I've done a lot of Indian guys. I mean, there's no way I'm going to get around it. And I'm not going to get to do the Russian guy, most likely.
Yeah.
Now, ironically, I was in a movie playing a character that had a was a Russian or Polish or Ukrainian last name. He was a city councilor. It was actually a movie I did with Paul, who stars in Kim's Convenience. We did it 6 months before we started doing Kim's Convenience, which is, I think, how our chemistry was so good on Kim's Convenience, because we'd already worked together.
Good.
And we spent a night in this movie outside improvising, because the real scene was happening down the road. So we were just stuck in this place improvising this scene between, he was playing a cop, I was playing a drunk driver, I was a city councilor, and I was yelling at him for stopping me. And I had this Polish or Russian or Ukrainian last name, I can't remember. And when I got to set, one of the stars of the movie said, "You don't look like a Polak," or whatever. I mean, he was being funny.
Yeah.
And I went, it's my dad. My mom was Indian. And, you know, that's the story.
Yep.
Let's move on. You know what? And so I just think we might be getting hung up on the politics of this more than the career aspects of it. And I personally think that work is work. You have to draw the line when it's a stereotype. You have to draw the line if it's abusive, or if it's, you know, if it's just not something you're comfortable doing. And I totally understand and support that, and I have done that. But getting hung up on, well, you know, am I being typecast? I don't know if you can afford to have that conversation until it's a problem.
Yeah, certainly not at that point or anywhere close to it. Thank you. In terms of the Indian, speaking Russian, by the way, in my IT career, I did a class in Nashville, and I was talking to people, and you know, my background came up, and I said where I was from, and then an Indian fella started speaking better Russian than I do, because he.
Of course, my people are all over the world. You know, there's an old joke. You know. There's an old joke. What were the first words heard on the moon? One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Chai Venom! Because there's an Indian guy waiting to sell Neil Armstrong tea. I mean, that's my people's joke.
Yeah. So great. I think I have a lot more questions for you on the acting side, but let's get to the martial arts. You're a black belt in karate and Kobudo, right?
I have my second dan in 2 different styles of karate, and I was the first Canadian to grade in my style in Kobudo in Japan.
So which style? And Kobudo, just in case people are not aware, this is the weapons part. Yeah. So which style?
It's Yoshinmon Shorinru. Yoshinmon, in Yoshinmon, you have both karate and Kobudo. Once you hit about a blue belt or a black belt in karate, you then start studying Kobudo. Yoshinmon, my master passed away 2 or 3 years ago, but until then he was a living master. And so one of his senseis from Cuba immigrated to Toronto, and that's how I started training with him, and that's why when I learned that style. And then I traveled to Japan to train with the Soshihan a couple of times, and yeah, it's been, you know, it's an interesting question you bring up, because I find that martial arts was actually very useful in terms of this career.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go with that next, of what you found that helps you become a better actor.
Well, you know, martial arts is warrior training. And being a warrior, I think, is not a bad stance to have in going through the arts as a career. Doesn't mean that you're at war.
Right.
It just means that you're prepared, and you're prepared for the eventualities of whatever might come up. So you're prepared in terms of your training. And martial arts, basically, you spend most of your time training. You don't spend your time fighting. So it's warrior training. I think that's a useful stance for an artist to have. I think for men in particular, I think it's really useful, because I know for me, there were things that I wasn't able to express appropriately in my life until I entered martial arts, and there I was able to harness things that, you know, had an appropriate outlet in the martial arts that wouldn't be appropriate elsewhere. So I think that's useful. I think it's useful for women for a very different reason, because, you know, they get to be badass and make sure that they're not vulnerable to some asshole who's, you know, trying to hurt them. And the discipline, you know, of learning kata, of respect. You know, respect is number one in martial arts. You know, mutual respect, respect for your teacher. All of that kind of pervades the camaraderie that you develop training with the same group of people in a dojo. That applies when you work in the arts. You know, you become a family in a dojo. In a play, you're a family. In a movie, you're a family. In a television show, you're a family, an instant family. And the ability to recognize and respect each other's position in that family, and to honor it, and to work together for the common goal. That's all martial arts teaches you. And so, you know, it was a great thing for me to have that and make those connections in my professional life.
Thank you. Just out of curiosity, because I want to know, who's your favorite martial artist in the acting world?
I like Jet Li because I think he's a good actor. Yeah. And I like Donnie Yen. I think he's a really good actor. Yeah. I mean, their martial arts skills go without saying.
Yes, absolutely. For both of those. Yeah.
I mean, Jackie Chan, is fun, but I don't think he's as good an actor as the other two. So, you know.
But he has his own niche. He wasn't trying to be, I'm a great actor. He's just, right. You're having fun and you have these incredible movies, and he found something that he was amazing at. So, Scott Adkins and Michael J. White, those are the two that I love right now. And I grew up on obviously Bruce. And I grew up on Van Damme. I started doing splits between the chairs just because of Van Damme. So that was kind of my entry into martial arts.
I don't have that flexibility. I'm still working.
Yeah, I don't either anymore. I used to. Okay, last as we wrap up, I asked this question to all of the actors that we have on. What is the one advice that you would give to a younger acting version of yourself?
A younger acting version of myself.
Mm-hmm.
I would say to trust the material and trust yourself 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're wrong, move on.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. It's been a more than enlightening conversation. I really appreciate you stopping in. I really appreciate you sharing your approach and why you're kind of coming to that perspective. It's incredibly useful, and I know that our viewers really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's fun been talking to you. So I hope it was useful.
Absolutely, it was. You're welcome to come back anytime. I have I have a few pages of notes. Some of the questions I was able to use. A lot of them I was not. So I look forward to speaking to you.
You should have shut me up. I would have answered more questions. You just let me know.
Let's do part 2. We'll record a part 2, and I get a chance to go into some other aspects. I would love that.
Okay, anytime.
And thank you to everybody who's tuning in. We were speaking with Sugith Varughese. I pronounced that name correctly the second time around. See, take 2, and come back. So if you like what you've seen, if you have any questions, please post them in the comments. Share, subscribe. You know the drill. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Alan.